Welcome to the Strategic Leader Podcast with me, Gemma Bullivant, and my co-host, Fiona Craig. This podcast is for HR professionals and people-focused leaders from any function who want to think, act, and feel naturally more strategic. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, welcome back to what is now Series 2 of the Strategic Leader Podcast. I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Fee Craig. Hi Fee.
Hi Gem, hi everybody.
So we are looking at a slight shift in what our podcast has been about so far, which is about how to be naturally more strategic. And some of the things that have come up in our previous episodes have pointed towards certain behaviors, perhaps blockers or things that might be getting in the way of us showing up more strategically. So there are certainly skills that we can acquire and practice and hone to allow us to operate more strategically, but we also need to think from a behavioral perspective and some of the things that maybe we could do slightly differently or believe slightly differently that would help us to show up more strategically. Fee, do you want to have a go at explaining in a slightly better way than I just have?
Well, I'm very happy to have a go. Season 1, Series 1, is it a series or a season? Who knows? Anyway.
It depends if you're American.
Oh, okay. Well, our first batch of podcasts, I think, focused quite clearly on some of the skills of taking a strategic approach to building your leadership capability. And I think season 2 is going to focus more on the behaviors. And when we say behaviors, let's just unpack what that means. Our behaviors, which is what other people see and other people experience, the way we show up, comes from the way that we think about the world. And the way that we think about the world comes from the things that we believe to be fundamentally true about ourselves, about the world, about other people. And some of those beliefs go really quite deep. Many of them are created very early on in our existences, in our childhood or our teenage years. Many of them are created within the family or within our school environment. And we often don't notice that they're there. It certainly doesn't have to be anything traumatic, although sometimes it is. But those beliefs are created and they go really, really deep and they become hardwired into how we think about ourselves, what we believe about ourselves and what we believe about the world. Those hard-baked beliefs affect the way that we think. And the way that we think affects the way that we behave in real life, which is the things that other people see. So we may be blissfully unaware that this process is going on, and we may simply be aware of the impact that we have on other people, in our careers, at work every day, without fully understanding, why am I having that impact? What's causing it? And what sits behind it? So season 2 is all about looking at some of those beliefs that we all have. I think we've got a list of about 12 of them, which we're going to unpick, that can cause us to behave in certain ways. Some of them we would generally consider to be hindering our leadership potential. Occasionally, some of them will help. Most of them hinder. But it's really about just being aware, bringing those different behaviors into an awareness so we can decide what to do about it.
One of the reasons that I think that this is extremely relevant to our podcast is that we can have all of the tools, skills, models, knowledge about operating strategically. But if any of our behaviors, beliefs, things that we think about ourselves get in the way, then we're never actually going to make those tools work for us, and they're going to get in the way of us being more strategic at work. So I think it's really important for us to build our self-awareness of what these beliefs and behaviors might be, and to identify the ones that we relate to and recognize in ourselves, so that we can start to do some work on enabling those to be less of a blocker and more empowering for us.
Yeah. And I think you said self-awareness and recognition, which is that a lot of this stuff, some of this stuff we'll recognize. And the minute we start talking about them, some people will go, oh, yeah, that's me. But some of this stuff is not obvious and we don't always know we're doing it. We don't always know the way our behaviors can negatively impact our leadership impact. We don't know that. We think, oh, I'm doing the work. How come I'm not progressing? And it does require us to take a bit of a hard look at what's going on internally as well as what's going on externally. And I think one of the things I've come to realize is that the more senior we become, the more we progress into management and then leadership, the tool that we use most often is our way of being. It's our sort of leadership presence.
Mm.
It's just our general sense of self as a leader. And it's a really hard thing to explain and pin down because everybody's is different. But I think the self as an instrument of leadership is a really important concept. So therefore we have to kind of explore, well, what does myself? Because there's going to be some brilliant things about me, clearly, but there's also going to be a few oddities, let's call them oddities, odd things about me that maybe I need to bring a little bit of awareness to. And I maybe need to say, well, maybe a little bit of less of that and a little bit more of the other might be helpful. So I don't think it's not about being someone other than yourself, and it's not about kind of reshaping your character or being inauthentic. It's just about understanding how you actually do show up and then deciding if that's fully in line with where you want to get to.
Mm, yes, I like that. And I often say self-awareness is a superpower. It's that your number one superpower as a leader. And the moment you can build enough self-awareness
Mhm.
to understand your own approach, your own impact, your own beliefs and behaviors, the more likely you are to show up in the way that's more aligned to how you want to show up, to use your fantastic terminology. So I think this is going to be a really good lens for us to look at being strategic. We're going to be starting this journey with imposter syndrome.
Now you hesitated and kind of put a funny look on your face when you said that. I could
Yes.
what's
uh,
going on? What's going on behind that face?
Yes, I have a love-hate relationship with the entire term and concept of imposter syndrome. It's something that probably needs no definition, but I'm sure we'll just share our version of that in a moment. But it's certainly something that I feel is a little bit controversial for me. I don't buy into it fully, but I can see some merits in us talking about it, and I think we have to start here because it is something that so many people relate to and connect with. And what's your definition, Fee?
Well, I've got a couple. So feeling inadequate and doubting one's accomplishments with a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud despite evidence of competence is a nice full wordy one.
And one of the reasons I really grapple with this as an idea is that it's a label that is now liberally attributed to pretty much most of us. There is some research that suggests that 70% of us have experienced or can associate with the term imposter syndrome in how we show up. And
Does that not make the 30% of people who don't suffer from it then imposters rather than the rest of the 70% of the rest of us?
well, I mean, stats are always relatively arbitrary, aren't they? But
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that just the very fact that there's a 70% proportion of the population that do feel in some way like they have experienced this leads me to think that really it's human. It's a human behavior, not some
Yeah.
sort of syndrome that needs fixing. But it's
Yes,
part of human nature.
part of human nature to doubt ourselves. I think, yeah, that stat I would say is probably borne out in how often it gets mentioned in coaching conversations that I have.
Mhm.
people will either bring it as the thing that they want to talk about, or it will sort of be mentioned in passing. But I think
Mm,
what's really tricky about it, and I think this is what you're alluding to with this kind of controversial label, is when we say, I have imposter syndrome, as in it's something that has been diagnosed, or I suffer from imposter syndrome, as in it's a defined set of characteristics. When if we unpack that and say, what are you actually feeling? What's
mm.
actually going on? How would you, if that label didn't exist, how would you describe what's going on? And what's going on, I guess, is I'm experiencing feelings of worry about this job interview or that meeting or what somebody thinks of me. I'm worried about them, about how it's
Yes,
going to turn out. And within that worry, there is an element of thinking, well, it could go bad for me, couldn't it? I could mess up.
yes,
Somebody might in that room might be cleverer than me. And
yes.
all of those things feel very natural and reasonable and human, to your
I
point.
think so. I think so. And I think there's, at what point does a natural fear, hesitation, worry, or lower than optimal confidence that we feel about something, at what point does that switch from being something that we can all associate with at times to something that qualifies under the terminology of imposter syndrome, to the
Mm.
extent that I think sometimes people can look at some of those symptoms, for want of a better term, of imposter syndrome and think, well, yes, I have that and I have that, therefore I have imposter syndrome. And that just makes me think of a cat's got four legs and a dog's got four legs, therefore a dog is a cat. It and I I don't mean to disrespect, because I am sure that within the category of people that do associate with some of those symptoms, let's call them, of imposter syndrome are very real, very debilitating, and very difficult and challenging to live with and to work with, and that get in the way quite a significant sense. If I were to say, yes, I regularly go to a meeting and feel like I do not know even the smallest, amount as much as the next everybody else in the room, and that absolutely gets in the way of me ever speaking up, and that absolutely means I don't sleep a wink the night before, and it means and there's this sort of a whole range of things that particular belief or fear that's happening in that room with that group of people is having a very serious impact on all sorts of other parts of my life, then completely it is something to unpick and address. But to your earlier point, if it is something that if we're feeling a bit nervous, we've got butterflies, we don't really know if what we're about to say is going to be heard in the right way. We've tried to pluck up the courage two or three times to ask a question. I'm going to do it next time, and I'm just going to see how it feels. But in all other cases, yes, I've been thinking about this meeting. I've been getting a bit kind of worried about it, but I had a reasonably good night's sleep. I'm doing other things. I'm not completely preoccupied by this meeting. Then is that more in the category of natural fear, natural worry about something that is a reasonably high stakes event for us in that moment because we're in
Mm.
a meeting with other senior people?
Yeah, because I don't think, is it likely or even desirable for us to approach anything that has got some stakes attached to it? Anything from a job interview down to a meeting.
Mm.
Is it natural to approach that with no sense of trepidation, no sense of fear, no sense of caution? I'm sure evolutionarily, that's not a thing, is it? You'd approach anything with some degree of caution. Is that degree of caution an appropriate amount?
Well, you mentioned that in coaching, it comes up a lot for you, and it comes up so much for me. That's why we kind of decided to start here. Really, was just it being such a universal topic that we can all relate to in some way. And when it comes up in coaching conversations that I have and I've had recently with various people, that very point has come up, which is, at what point do I consider I belong in that room, or I have something of worth to say? Is the signal of that I no longer feel nervous? I have no sense of nerves. Because if that's the signal, the chances are that might never
Yeah.
happen,
Yeah.
because I think it is perfectly natural to feel nervous in a situation that is slightly out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And when we talk about this, and when I talk about this with coaching clients, and anyone who's a coaching client of mine who's listening to this has probably heard me say this many times, is think about a professional actor or a professional athlete. And I've read interviews of professional actors who say they're throwing up
Mm,
2 minutes
yeah.
before curtain up. But they're
Same.
professional actors. That's what they do, and they put on fabulous performances despite the fact that 2 minutes earlier they're thrown up in the toilets.
Mm.
Now they would say, you take those nerves as a sign that I'm about to perform, and I've trained my brain to interpret those nerves in that way, and not in the way that a lot of us interpret them, which is, that's a sign that I don't belong here.
That's interesting, isn't it? So it's a conditioning thing. We think the fear is a sign, is some sort of evidence that we don't belong.
Mm.
Actually, the fear may just be, just a reasonable state of preparation to kind of get the
You're
adrenaline
you
flowing, get your brain switched on, you know, get you kind of fired up for this
mm,
conversation you're about to have.
absolutely. So you're almost questioning, if it's not there, you're questioning, why isn't it there? Rather than actually kind of going, there are the nerves. It's time. It's I'm about to do this important race in my sporting career, or I'm about to do this important performance in my acting career. And those nerves are a sign that that's what I need to do. So can we translate that into, I'm about to do a presentation to a large room of people? Of course I'm going to feel nervous. Of course I'll feel nervous.
Well, and also, is it nerves? Because neurologically speaking, nervousness and excitement neurologically are very, very similar. There's very few differences in what happens in your body between
Yes.
fear and excitement. And so maybe a question is, what if what I'm experiencing right now before I go into this job interview or have this conversation or write this document or whatever it might be
Mm.
that's causing you to think I don't belong here, I'm not good enough. Maybe those physical symptoms I'm experiencing, what if they're not fear? What if they're excitement? What if I'm just mistaking them for fear?
I
I
love that.
guess
That's a reframe.
yeah, and I guess it would take quite a bit of effort to make that real, but you could very much kind of work on that and go, it feels like fear, but it's, racing heart, sweaty palms, all of these neurological characteristics. What if I'm just mistaking them for fear and actually it's exciting because I'm doing something I want to do? I'm doing something that actually I may be pretty good at. I'm doing something that will move this bit forward. I'm doing something that I've been wanting to do for quite a long time or that is going to feel really good when it's done. There could be lots of reasons. So, what if it was excitement and not fear? Might be
Yes.
something to hold on to. Neurologically, it feels like fear. It could be excitement.
And that's leading me to also think about visualization, which I think is something that athletes and performers have
Yes.
also trained themselves to do, which is, first of all, these nerves could be excitement rather than fear. But even if my brain just does not buy into that, my visualization is that I'm doing something that I need to do to practice. I need to do to build my profile. I know that it's going to be important to me and I'll get benefit from it. It will help to take my project forward. It will help to broaden people's understanding of something that I'm really passionate about, whatever it might be. But you're taking yourself to the outcome and the purpose of what it is that you're doing to give you the impetus and the motivation that that's actually what we're going after. That will be my reward. My reward after this won't be necessarily at some stage I won't feel nervous about this anymore, because once it's done, the nerves will go. That might be a reality, but actually the reward is the sense of achievement or something that you've done that you didn't necessarily have complete confidence that you were going to be able to do. And that could be what helps you to step through that fear zone and into the growth or stretch zone, but steps you away from the comfort zone. And I think sometimes what happens is that we don't step through the fear zone because we interpret those nerves as nerves and not opportunity.
Oh yes, that's great, isn't it? And what you just said there really makes me think about the reward. What are we expecting the reward to be? What are we expecting the outcome to be? Because you made a great point when we were chatting earlier before we started recording this around if we're expecting the outcome to be 100% support from everybody in the room, then we are not going to get that. We are going to fail because that never happens.
Mm.
You may get broad support from most people. You may get enough support to move it forward. That would be a good outcome. But you're not going to get 100% buy-in from every person in the room who's sitting there going, wow, my God, Fee's brilliant, isn't she? That's just not going to happen. So if we're expecting that to be the reward, then we're going to be let down, and we could consider that a failure. But your point earlier on was a great quote from Viv Groskop, one of the
One of my
you and I both.
faves.
How to Own the Room. What was that quote that you gave from Viv?
So Viv Groskop once said in something I saw her speaking at, which was about her book, How to Own the Room, which is a fabulous book. I recommend it enormously. She basically said, sometimes our fear of speaking in front of people is to do with this concept of what people might think of us, and that stops us from doing it. And she said something incredibly freeing, in my view, and has stayed with me ever since, which is, in any given moment when you're speaking to a group of people, whether it's a small group in a meeting or whether it's a large group in a presentation or auditorium or bigger, is a third of the room will like what you have to say. A third of the room quite possibly will actively dislike what you've got to say or how you've said it. And a third of the room won't care enough to have an opinion either way.
We certainly forget all about that bunch of people in the middle that don't really care, or they're probably not listening, or they're probably doing their shopping or something.
And she went on to question why we focus on the ones that don't buy into us,
Mhm, mhm.
often at the expense of the ones that are actually bought into what we've got to say. And also this idea of, where the influencing might happen, which is somewhere between those two groups. So you keep your champions with you, your advocates, and you work to influence the ones who are pretty neutral. If some of your dissenters are convinced along the way, then fantastic. But let's not focus on those. Let's accept that not everybody is going to love what it is that you've got to say. If you're using that as your barometer of success or failure, then 9 times out of 10, you're likely to consider it a failure if you haven't convinced every single person present that what you've had to say is insightful, useful, and influential, and we love it, and we love how you did it. So I think there's a redressing the expectations, a resetting of the bar of expectations that we can do for ourselves that in some way will help us to tackle some of the features, if you like, of imposter syndrome. Some
Mm.
of the things that imposter syndrome might be the box that we've ticked that makes us think that we have imposter syndrome. If you can break it down into some of those component parts, that might be enough to help to overcome and retrain our brain into recognizing that the more we do this stuff, the more we notice that actually the evidence suggests that we do belong there, we do have something to say, or we do have the confidence to speak up.
So tell me, Jen, do you ever suffer from imposter syndrome?
I would say absolutely. I would definitely put myself in that 70% category because I can tick some of those boxes some of the time. I don't buy into the fact that that means I have imposter syndrome, But if we were looking at some of the components, have I ever feared that I might fail at something? Of course I have. I think it would be unnatural to do something that is quite stretching, quite challenging, and not be concerned about whether it might fail. Has it ever stopped me from doing something? Quite possibly. I can't think of an example right now, but I would imagine yes. Maybe I haven't put my hand up for something because I've not felt confident enough to do it. Should I have done it? Maybe, but we'll never know.
Good answer.
Have I ever felt like I've not been fully qualified to do something in that moment? Yes, I have. Because the way I look at it, that's a component part of being in growth zone and learning zone, is this idea that you are actually growing and learning, and you've kind of got to do it to embed that learning.
Yeah, I think like you've made that real distinction between, do I feel moments of uncertainty and worry and fear about the situations I'm about to put myself into?
Mm,
Yes. Do I call it imposter syndrome? Maybe not. And I'm wondering whether actually having a label, it can be helpful as a shortcut, or it can be helpful in terms of getting to the root of
mm,
what we're actually talking about. But I wonder whether it can also be something to hide behind and something to give us an excuse to not go for things. So
yeah.
I can't do that because I have imposter syndrome. Oh, I'm not going to apply for that job because I have imposter syndrome. And you could say, I'm not going to apply for that job because I'm worried that I might not get it. Well, you definitely won't get it if you don't apply for it.
Mm,
So I
absolutely.
wonder whether it's useful as a shortcut or in very, very extreme cases, which are probably more around extreme anxiety.
Mm,
Or perhaps somebody genuinely is in a job that's not right for them. But in
completely out
most
of their depth.
completely out of their depths. But
But
in
then it's
most
not a syndrome, is it? That's just a fact.
it's just it's just a set of circumstances, isn't it? But I wonder whether if we kind of think if our brain goes straight to I have imposter syndrome, we would, with compassion and curiosity, invite ourselves to say, okay, what am I actually experiencing here? I'm worried about tomorrow's board meeting
Yeah.
because I'm concerned that such and such may not like what I have to say, or
Yeah.
I'm concerned that I haven't got my arguments straight, in which case maybe that's just a warning shot to say, well, go and sort that out before you walk into the meeting. I'm concerned that I might fluff my lines, in which case that might be, let's give ourselves a talking to in terms of we all fluff our lines and most people don't notice. I'm
And
con-
have I prepared?
exactly. Is it a sign that it's trying to alert me to some more preparation I need to do? Or do I just need to recognize that actually this is an important meeting or a job interview, whatever it is we might be thinking about? It's important to me. And I really want it to go well. And it could be excitement.
Mm.
Feels a much kind of more productive and kinder way of facing down some of those situations than going, I have imposter syndrome and therefore it's going to be bad. Let's articulate what's actually going on for me here.
Well, it seems to me that as we go through this series 2 of The Strategic Leader, we will start to look at some other types of behaviors and challenges and blockers that may actually also fall under the broader category of imposter syndrome. So I don't think we're done yet with
No.
pesky old imposter. And in fact, I've found this a really interesting conversation from a personal perspective because of my personal wrangle that I have, my love-hate relationship with the term imposter syndrome. And and so yeah, thank you for helping my thinking on that topic. We'd love to hear from you and your experiences of imposter syndrome. What do you make of it? Do you share my challenge with the term? Or does it feel very real for you? We'd love to hear from you and your experiences, so do drop us a line. And on behalf of both of us, thanks for listening and bye for now. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Strategic Leader. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to access more of our recordings. And if you think it'd be useful for someone else, please forward to them and leave a review. We base our content on questions we are regularly asked and what you want to know more about, so please do email us with any questions or comments to gemma@gemmabullivant.co.uk. And remember, you're already being more strategic than you realise.